moving a source code to production, making it production ready, deploying it. But what all it takes, right? You would see a running code where you can see the running pipelines, you can see the things getting deployed. You will also get an access to the template, which you can further see or refer to for your future users. You test them, you build them, and then you move it to a higher environment. That is what exactly is wanted. Why? Because there was a time when developers used to push everything in one go after months. You might have released, today is the release day. You might have realized that, you might have heard that. Today is the release day. What would happen? The entire code would be deployed to production, and then there will be many bugs coming in. But just imagine there was a phase when you would have tested it. Your one smaller commit that would have been built properly, tested properly, there were end-to-end tests for it, and then deployed. What that would mean? That it's safe. Your code, the commit that you have pushed is safe, it is beyond any bugs, and now you can put it to the higher environment. So what you see here in the diagram is, so your source code moves to GitHub, right? You can use any versioning tool. So there will be certain jobs, you will run them, that would be including your installing the dependencies, building the application, testing the application, and deploying it. All of this is automated. For sure, it is protecting it from the human errors. Why? Because you are actually running the test without putting in your efforts, you are automating everything. So this is just first half, right? That is your continuous integration. The other part is continuous deployment, which we'll cover later. Cool. So just some theoretical bit on to understand what exactly continuous integration is. It is like the automatic execution of the pipelines. So whenever you trigger, right, everybody knows pushing the code, taking the pull from the code, creating a pull request. There are two types of development strategy: trunk based or pull request based, right? Now all of this when happens, this acts as a trigger for the pipeline to run. And once that happens, all of the jobs that you decided in the pipeline would start running at that trigger. Now there are certain terminologies, because when I share the code, you will see some terms, right? Maybe for some of the folks it's new, but for some of you, you might have been aware of it. Now, when you see a pipeline, what happens is, so just imagine I have a code base, right? And I have to create a pipeline. What my first step would be to create a GitHub folder, .github, and define the workflows in it, where the workflows would have, now today what I'm right now showing is a PR based approach. In some of the projects, your strategy would be to have a trunk based. Just the difference is I will create my own branch, feature branch, I will just push in the code and then the pipeline would run on it. So my first workflow would be for the pull request that I would raise. So for that I have created a prbuild.yaml. A YAML file represents the entire pipeline structure that you would want to run. So this on, right, when I talked about the trigger, a trigger can be pushing on the code, taking a pull request, all of these defines when you want to run the pipeline exactly for the first time. So there could be two things. Either your trigger could be a push when you push on the main branch, or there could be a pull request when you raise a feature branch pull request, right? And there can be types, whether the pull request has been opened, it should not be in the draft state, then only I want to run all of this. And this completely depends from project to project. GitHub provides a lot of options to configure this file, right? This is one of the ways. You can do it in other ways as well. Cool. Now what you see, the next thing is the job, right? A job is a task. You can ask your pipeline to first install the dependencies. You can say to test it. What are these things? These are the jobs or tasks that you want to run. Okay. Now what do you think? When these tasks run, are they running in parallel or in sequence? When I say I want to install the dependencies, that is my first job. I want to run the test, that is my second job. I want to do a security scan, that is the third job. What would you expect? Do you expect them to run in sequence or to run in parallel? Okay. Does the security scan and the test have to be dependent on each other? No. So should they run in parallel? Yes. Now, dependencies. But once the tests are running and your security scan, then not, na? Yeah. So by default, the jobs run in parallel, right? But you can define them in a sequential way. How we can do that, you will see in the code. But now you understand what jobs are, right? So you need a runner. What a runner is, so these jobs, right, these dependencies, the code building, everything needs a container or an image where these things would run. Anybody heard of Docker container, Docker image, right? Similar methodology, similar concept. So usually there are multiple runners. It can be Mac OS, it can be others, but I mean we prefer Ubuntu. Now comes the steps. Steps are always sequential, be aware of it. So once you have a job, asking it to check into the code, and then you will follow the steps. You will check into the repo, that is the name of your first step, this one, and then you will ask, so what is uses, right? Now to tell GitHub how to check into the code, you have to provide it an action, which is either predefined by GitHub. You can go to GitHub Marketplace, you will find a list of actions asking it to do the linting. Is there an action for it? Is there an action in GitHub to check into the code? Yes, there is. You will always find pre-built actions, and then you can quickly say that I want to use this action to check into the code. Then I want to set up the environment, and now I want to run the test. This script is already there in a package.json. You are all aware of it. Yarn test, run the script. Then similarly, you would, once your tests are run, you would need the coverage report. You would want to have it into the artifacts. So you will create a coverage report and upload the artifact. So for everything, GitHub is giving you a predefined action. There would be some instances where you would like to customize your own, which is also an option. Once you have done that, I would just tell it that I want a artifact with the name test coverage, and I want to keep it in this, and it has to use this path. Quickly moving to the next step, right? So this was the first one. Then it is using a security scan. This is, I think, a must. Even if I say that project to project, but this is a basic standard guideline that I think everyone should follow. You would quickly run a yarn audit. This is another job, and these two can, this one and the next one can run in parallel. You will just run yarn audit, and it will quickly check if there are any dependencies or not. What if security scan fails? Would you still like to put your build folder into the artifact and deploy it? No, right? Then that means I have to make it dependent on the previous jobs. So how will I do that? So for the artifacts creation, I would need the test and the security scan job to pass, and then only this would run. So I will quickly check into the repo. Once all of these things pass, I will build the package using yarn build script, and then I will create an artifact named static build folder using this path. If in case you want to see whatever you had uploaded is correct and you just want to verify it, you can use another step, which is downloading the artifact, just looking into using ls-r to see what is the structure of my downloaded files. As simple as that. But what I am just running this once I create a pull request. Let's quickly see how that happens. So the test failed, right? Because I changed something, I was checking on the snapshot, the test failed. So the artifacts didn't generate. It stopped here only, which is a valid point, right? Multiple conditions and settings in GitHub asking it to only merge it when your artifacts are ready. When you have a build folder in the artifacts, then only the button should be enabled to merge the code. So there are certain conditions to enable, disable. That also could be a practice for you or your team members in the team. So the test passed, right? And now the artifacts job is running. So we talked about the PR build YAML, right? But as I'm reiterating, it worked on the, it ran once you create the merge request. But my merge request is now into master or main branch. Again, I have to run some jobs to confirm it as the source of truth, right? So I'll just move into the main pipeline, which is for once the code is into the main branch, right? This thing will be explained why these permissions are required. You would need it for the infra provisioning part, right? But the rest of the things, if you see in the jobs, that would remain same. I mean, it can differ from project to project, but right now you're running the test again on the source of truth because your main would be deploying at the end. So that code should be again tested and automated properly. One thing that you should definitely add here, right, I will talk about in the best practices, should be your end-to-end test as well. If the end-to-end test pointing to an environment similar to the prod one are not tested, I mean, I think that is one of the major things that should be covered in your pipeline and definitely should be automated. By end-to-end test, just for the people, it could be anything. You can use Test Cafe, Cypress, those tests I'm talking about, which test the user journeys from end-to-end. Again, the same thing, we're creating the artifact, we put it in the build folder, and then we will talk about provisioning the infrastructure. Now, if you see here, what all passed? The test passed, security scan passed, the artifacts are created. Now, once this artifact, we have the build folder, I want to deploy it, right? Okay, so I understand for people who, I mean, it's new for you completely from the scratch, right? Just don't think that it's overwhelming. You have pretty good documentation from GitHub. Just understand that how you want to version the code. Just understand what you want to run as the jobs. What you want to exactly do to make your code secure and testable before pushing it to deployment, right? That is your only goal for CI. Now, quickly talking about best practices. In the beginning I talked about, right, there was a team who started coding in 1 month, February, and they put their code into production in X number of months, and they didn't realize how many things were failing. There was just commits and commits in a very longer period of time. You complete one feature, you make a commit. Then you complete a feature, you make a commit. That is not how exactly it should be. Make smaller commits, test smaller commits, and then make that code testable. So commit early, often, and minimize branching. Use automation wherever possible. As I mentioned, if you're doing unit testing, then do the end-to-end testing as well. And there should be only one way to deploy to production, which means that once you're deploying it, there should be one job defining it. There should be no other way through which you can put the code onto production, because if you do that, you will have two sources of truth and you will never know which one caused the problem or which one caused the issue. Have a clear plan to test, what to test, when and where, right? And there is a tendency that you build every time in each job. That is also not needed. So you have to see how much structure you should provide to your pipeline in a way that it does not do things in a repetitive manner or a redundant manner. Then keep your production and test environment similar as possible. Obviously, if you're running end-to-end test and you're running into the test environment, but it does not look similar to production, what exactly are you testing? Are you sure that your test would pick up any issues that were happening in the production environment? No, right? You would want something similar to that in your test environment as well. So that is easy to configure, especially in end-to-end test. You can easily do that. Think about the security, avoid any parallel work that is happening. What your S3 buckets are, so there are different ways or different strategies through which AWS provides you to store your data. One of them is to store in the form of objects. Why object? Because it would have the path or the resource path. It would also contain some metadata for it. So it looks like an object for it in the bucket. Just consider it is a space, it is a storage space where you're putting in the entire build folder, right? You generated it, it had all the manifest file, the rest of the things, the static folder, everything goes into the build folder. Then there are certain practices that you need to follow when you create a bucket. One, it should have a unique name. There's proper description in the bucket, in the AWS on what guidelines you should follow. One is to have a unique name, some naming conventions that you have. Just skip it because you can read it there, how many letters to follow, how to name it, that is pretty readable. This one is actually important. When you create a bucket, right, it says which region you should specify. Now, why this region is important? Because then there are certain factors, right? If you choose a particular region, for example, I select US East, would this deliver the content faster? Is there any latency? Would that cost me more than the other region that I would select? So there are certain factors that you should, and then sometimes there is a compliance as well. So all these guidelines, when you go to the console, you'll be able to see it. There were certain discussions on whether to make it public or private. Ideally, you should make it private and ask CloudFront, and you should give the access to CloudFront to access it. And then you host it from CloudFront. You're understanding it. your bucket is directly private, but only CloudFront has the access. You can provide it to the policies, and then you only give that access to CloudFront to present it or host it. So if you see here, right, right now we are automating the bucket creation and creating a CloudFront distribution. So this was a bucket that got created. It has a build folder you're all aware of, like how it looks like. It has all the things that you wanted from the build folder, the static things and the rest of the public files. And this is in my in the bucket. And then I mentioned you, right, that you can provide a policy saying that the block all public access, I have enabled it. That means nobody can access it publicly. But I would provide a policy asking it that it can be only accessed through CloudFront. Right? So this is how you can actually entangle both of these or connect both of these. Right now the good part is you can do it manually. You can go here, you can create a bucket, you can provide all of these things that I provided. You can create a bucket, you can upload everything and just select from the folder your local directory. All of that can be done. But the good part here, what you will learn is how to automate this manual creation, which would again help you because when the manual work is gone and then the redundancy of the resources is gone. So you created the bucket, but as I mentioned that we have to talk about the CloudFront as well. So somebody mentioned content delivery network, right, CDN. So once you have the bucket, right, you want to deliver it to the people, right, on the web. So how are you going to do it? So this is an Amazon provides you multiple services. This is one of the service which allows you to create a distribution. So what it will do exactly? I think this diagram is a complete correct representation. So you make a hit to the application. What that application will do, it will go to the CloudFront, which will access your resources from the nearest location. That means it would be faster, obviously. The request would be happen in a lesser time. So that location is known as the edge location, right? Now what happens is that it keeps the resource in its cache. So that means every time a user makes a hit, it would be a quicker request. The response would be quicker, right? But what happens if the request is made to a new resource or there's something which the CloudFront does not have in its cache? It will again go back to the server, it will fetch it, it will keep it in the cache, and then again the same request, the faster request would happen. As simple process as that. So just imagine it's giving you a distribution network that allows you to fetch the location from the, resources from the closer locations. So right now what you see that the application is hosted on this URL, this distribution, right? But is this distribution readable? I mean, would you like to have your clients this URL? No, right? So there is one more thing where you can provide your own domain over this distribution ID that AWS CloudFront has provided. That is Route 53. If we get time, we would cover it. But just to tell you that this can be overridden by the domain that you select. You can purchase it from anywhere and then you can ask this to be connected to that domain, right? So right now, my application is accessible through CloudFront. Now, there is some more exciting part that is coming up, that all of this is manual, but how we are going to do it in the pipeline, right? This is all console.